There's research, anxiety, stress, and depression are increasing consistently. And it comes back to connection and strategies.
Yeah, a good friend of mine who's a geneticist said it takes a very long time to evolve a species. It doesn't take very long to devolve a species. You can crash a species very quickly. In terms of people feeling overwhelmed and saying, I can't do anything right now because of what's happening in the world. I remember when I was an undergraduate, the 90s were a pretty peaceful time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we had Gulf War and things like that, but
Sure.
relatively speaking. And the professor whose lab I worked in told me, this was in Santa Barbara, where they burned the bank down during the Vietnam War protests. But he said that in the early 70s, very early 70s and late 60s, that you'd be giving a lecture. He was a young professor, and students would just stand up. What about the war in Vietnam? And he's like, this is a physiology class. We're talking about this. And they'd say, what about, and the students would start protesting. So this is not a really new phenomenon.
I agree.
I mean, this was happening. People feeling overwhelmed, people feeling like the campus was theirs. They're going to make noise. I'm not justifying unlawful protest. I'm certainly not justifying any kind of protest where certain students are being restricted. I'm I'll go on record. I'm fundamentally opposed to that. But this notion that people are feeling overwhelmed, and young people are full of energy, and they want people to know how overwhelmed they feel and how angry they feel. But in the backdrop, the conveyor's moving forward.
I agree.
But I think that in order for people to feel like, and this comes from the article that was written by you, you quoted a comment. Someone said, we're not overreacting, we're underreacting. So in order for people to feel heard, I want to double click on that comment, but in order for people to feel really heard and understood in their reaction, I think it's also important that our society just can't sit around protesting all day and we can't we can't dissolve into a puddle of our own tears. And I do want to talk to you about the ways that you're formalizing this work, because one thing that I think is wonderful that's happened in the last 10 years or so is that we've moved from the language of consciousness and mindfulness, which I think are great terms,
Of course.
to long exhale breathing, to the notion that stress can be adaptive, Ali Crumb's lab, it can make us better, to an understanding that there's a way of working with your physiology to be stronger and yet acknowledge your physiology. I'm feeling stressed. Now I need to bring my stress down. I'm exhausted. I need to figure out a way to have more energy, work on sleep, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think it's happened yet, but I think it's starting that psychology needs the same kind of organizational principles so that people can move past narcissism, gaslighting, claiming everyone that they don't like is being abusive. And there's been a sort of psychological, I don't want to say collapse, but I don't think people know how to navigate this space. Whereas I think mindfulness, consciousness, and the idea that we need to take care of our sleep, we need to exercise, we need sunlight, I and others have worked very hard to try and get people to understand, like, you need to work with your body. You're not trying to conquer your body, but you do need to nudge it and sometimes push it. You don't want to be that person 10 hours on the treadmill who's suppressing everything. And I think where psychology has been a little bit self-defeating is that there's a lot of language. And it can start to feel like, oh, this is a lot. I got shit to do. So along those lines, if you are told, so-and-so's gaslighting me, they're a narcissist, that, fascism is taking over and like you expect me to not be outraged, quote, we're not overreacting, we're underreacting. You're a martial artist, you're a very staid guy.
Yeah, there you go.
Where do you start? What do you say to that person?
Well, I think we have to ask them if they're being effective. And so is whatever you're doing leading to the change that you want it to have? And if they know about emotions, I don't know about you, but when someone is yelling and screaming at me, I shut down. I'm no longer present. And so they're actually not getting their goal achieved. If they're asking me to do something different or they're trying to help me understand something, if they can't communicate in a way that I can understand it and I want to actually listen, it's not going anywhere. So I think that people need to recognize that I'm a person who is both and. So just to give you a concrete example, our program Ruler, which is the school-based work that we do, is an all the schools in one district of Harlem, New York. 21 schools, thousands of kids, the teachers, the leaders. The deputy superintendent, Dawn, is my former student. They're facing food scarcity. These are really troubled families in many instances. They're facing, obviously, racism. They're facing poverty, home insecurity. Of course, I want to soften that problem. I would do anything I could to make sure everybody has a meal. At the same time, every one of those kids is being dropped off at school. And we're expecting that kid to thrive for 8 hours a day in that classroom. How could I not teach that kid skills to thrive? I have to. There's no obligation. It's my moral obligation to help that kid be the best version of themselves, no matter what their background is, no matter what their circumstances are. It doesn't mean that I'm not also thinking about that. And I think that people in our society today, this is part of that article, is that we're so focused on the big change. Many of us have very little control over the big change. I feel blessed that I have some control over the lives of thousands of kids that are waking up every morning and trying to be the best versions of themselves. But they need help. They need strategies. They need teachers who are who can be the best versions of themselves for them. They need leaders who care about the teachers. And so I think that we have to find in our own way, I know my way, and I sleep well at night thinking I'm doing important work to support people and having well-being. It doesn't mean I don't think about the larger issues, but I do think that the more well people are, the better they're able to be at problem solving around the larger societal issues. I don't think a dysregulated society is going to solve its problems.
I agree completely, and I'm grateful for the work you're doing. I feel like again, I just draw the parallel to what's happened around sleep, stress regulation, exercise, nutrition. I feel like there's always resistance at the beginning. Like, what is this stuff? Like, I don't want a morning routine. I just want to get up and do my thing. Like, I don't want to hear that alcohol is bad for me. Like, I mean, when I was coming up in academia, like alcohol was everywhere. The happy hour, it was the source of a lot of problems. I was never a big drinker. So for me, it was like great opportunity to go do something else. But if you didn't drink with your senior colleagues, it was kind of like people were like, what's wrong with you? Or something like that. I think what causes a tide change is when, first of all, someone creates a structure around things that science shows work. You've been doing that. And I love that you're taking this broader through books, through podcasts, into the school districts. We'll talk more about the ways you're doing it, ways people can incorporate some of this. But I think at some point, a few or more brave individuals start incorporating a structure like, oh, wow, maybe Matt Walker's right. Maybe sleep when you're dead is not a good philosophy. And now the mindset is, well, if you sleep, you're smarter. If you're smarter, you're more effective. And so the people who are doing best are incorporating a structure. And then I also think inevitably what happens, and we're kind of edging up against this now, at least in the sorts of things that I teach, is a pushback. Like, okay, enough structure. Like, we need some freedom. I'm sensing that now. People are like, how many things am I supposed to do? Yeah. And the idea is like, you're not supposed to do them all. You're supposed to do what you need, right? And I acknowledge that that's happening now. That's the contour of sort of the areas that I've worked in and tried to share. In the area that you work in are trying to share, and I realize there's overlap, I feel like the structure is there. I think great examples of people, kids and adults, who are really not just succeeding, not just getting by, but are like really kicking butt by virtue of doing the things that you're talking about. That's what's going to lead to a systemic change. I think about Steve Kerr talks about meditation, and he's Steve Kerr. So you're like, okay, people who like basketball are like, this guy's a stud and he meditates.
Exactly.
And so meditation is no longer considered magic carpet stuff.
Yeah.
Right? For every one of these things, that's kind of how it is. It's like breath work. Okay, like I know Wim Hof. Wim is a little bit eccentric. People are like, oh yeah, breathe, exhale. That's like, everyone does that now. So no one's going to be like, oh, now we're breathing. And like, but how much time do we have to spend breathing? And so I think with what you're talking about, I feel like it's central to everything. I actually worry about our species if we don't incorporate the sorts of things that you're talking about. You talk about, the idea of regulating is not suppressing. Like, I think the concepts are critical and the practices are critical. So could you give us a couple examples of the concepts that are just core concepts. We started off this way, but
Sure.
and then maybe a few practical tools so that people can start to think about this in the same way that 10 years ago we might have talked about, like, hey, like, you think sleep when you're dead is working for you, but you're actually kind of an idiot when you don't sleep, and you're in a job that requires you to be smart, not an idiot. This kind of thing.
Yeah. I think, firstly, in my book, I have something called the Dealing with Feeling Wheel. And this goes directly to what you're thinking about. When people are dysregulated, when parents are like dealing with a kid, for example, who's dysregulated, they get desperate. Let's take a deep breath. Breathe. No, let's go for a walk. No, let's cook together. No, let's play a game. No, let's do this. And you go crazy. That's not helpful. I'll give you an example for myself. For a couple of months, I have so much work and I have not slept well. The last week, I've prioritized going to bed early. I prioritized like real dark, the darkened room. And I woke up today at 7:30. I was like, oh God, it's a miracle. Like 7:30. It's like, it's the middle of the afternoon. And I feel energized today. I feel, and I'm in a good place. And I felt that way for like a week now. I recognize I'm building new patterns for my sleep. It's no longer in my wheel a priority. I figured it out. There are some days where I just feel I can't think straight. I'm like all over the place. I realize that I've been maybe on social media too much. I realize I have like 85 things on my to-do list. And I'm like, Mark, you got to go back to your mindfulness work. You need some breath work. You need to just sit around. You need to take that space. You need to get to that hot yoga class. You need to do this. You need this back into your routine. There are other days I sit around and think, I'm so lonely. I don't talk to anybody anymore. I feel like whatever. And I'm like, I need connection. I'm desperate for connection. I think that's the way we have to look at it. That there are these components of our well-being that are correlated and are the same as what we do to regulate our emotions. There's the self-awareness piece. Am I at all like paying attention to my emotions right now? There's that breath work piece. There's the cognitive work. There's the relational work. There's the biology of it, the sleep, the nutrition, the physical activity. Like, for example, one of the things that happened for me in writing this new book was that I became very, very committed to my own fitness. Martial arts was like, that was like teaching 10 karate classes a week. I was younger then. I was in the best shape of my life. Then I got like dumpy professor syndrome. And like, I'm not getting on that stage looking that way anymore. I was like, whoa. And I made this major commitment. And one of the things that happened to me was that it became my go-to strategy for my overwhelm and stress while writing my book. And I remember saying to myself one day, like, Mark, you may not finish this book, but you're going to be in the best freaking shape of your life. And truthfully, it transformed my life. Now, here's why I'm telling you that story. Because in the conversation with this friend, Marco, who is a trainer, we started having these conversations around fitness identity and how it relates to emotional intelligence identity. And I realized something magical, which is that now at 56, it's been 4 years that I've like done my 4 workouts a week. I mean, I haven't really missed a workout unless I'm like on a vacation, but I'll still do something else. I cannot not exercise. And this morning, just to be, talking about, coming on Huberman Lab, I'm like, I woke up at 7:30. I'm like, I got to get there by this time, but like, I can't work out. I have to work out before I go to Huberman. Like, I can't show up not doing my workout. And I knew I would feel better. I knew I'd be more present. And I did my hour, back workout. But the point I'm really making here is that I identify as a person who exercises. It's like just who I am. My vision for the world is that we cultivate people who identify as well-regulated. Because if you walk into a room thinking to yourself, I got this, nothing you can say can trigger me, I can get through this, or I can manage my emotions, life is going to be completely different. And that's why I end my book with this concept that people talk a lot about, like be the best self, and everybody's talking about their best selves. But it really does relate to emotion regulation, and there's good research to support it. That you asked me for like a concrete technique. Well, this is that thing we call the meta moment. And I cultivated this technique with my colleague, Robin.